Lecture 30 Becoming a Leader is Becoming Yourself, Part 2. 3. Choosing results or principles. In my previous discussion, I talked about the first dilemma of being oneself, which is the conflict between self and others. The second dilemma of being oneself is the conflict between results and principles. Each of us has two inner voices, one pursuing results and the other insisting on principles. We often face the dilemma of whether to be the self that pursues results or the self that upholds principles. To help you understand the conflict between results and principles, let me ask you a question: do you steal? Most people would answer, no. However, I once heard a more honest answer from a university president. He hesitated and said, "I have stolen before." I then asked him, "Do you still steal now?" He said he doesn't steal anymore. I asked one last question: if it was necessary, would you steal again? Notice that when he answered this question, it was mainly the voice of the results-driven self speaking. If it was the voice of the principle-driven self, he would likely say, "I don't steal now because stealing is wrong." Results and principles are the two logics we use to do things. Sometimes we do things because of the results, such as some companies selling fake products, which is the logic of results because selling fake products benefits them. Some companies do not sell fake products because selling fake products may be caught, fined, and lose the trust of customers, which is also the logic of results. Some companies, even if there is no possibility of being caught, still firmly refuse to sell fake products, which is the logic of principles. You should note that I am not saying that the logic of principles is better than the logic of results. Both logics have their reasons. For example, not stealing seems to be a principle that everyone should follow, but what if not stealing means your family will die? There was a case in Beijing that you may have read about in the newspaper. A laid-off worker's wife was seriously ill and needed continuous treatment, but they had no money to pay for it. The laid-off worker forged the hospital's bill, and the hospital thought they had paid the fee, so they continued to treat the patient. Of course, it was eventually discovered. If not stealing means your family will die, would you steal or not? A leader often faces the dilemma of choosing between results and principles. A leader must pursue results and uphold principles, so what should they do? There is an academic master in the management field named James March, whom I have mentioned in my editorial before. He said that leaders should learn from Don Quixote. March said that Don Quixote's logic of action is not because of the results, but because of the principles. Don Quixote's principle is, "I am a knight, and I will do what a knight should do. I won't calculate the results of doing so." I have been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to consult with March several times. He told me that he wants leaders to learn from Don Quixote because in today's society, everyone is too far from Don Quixote. Everyone values results too much and principles too little. What leaders really need to do is to find a balance between principles and results. If you are interested, you can also read the full conversation between March and me in the book, The First Book of Leadership. Which principle to choose? As I mentioned earlier, the second dilemma of being oneself is the conflict between results and principles. However, not only do results and principles conflict, but principles and principles can also conflict. This is the third dilemma of being oneself, the conflict between principles. Should I be the self that upholds this principle or the self that upholds that principle? This dilemma, like the previous two, has been a challenge for individuals throughout history. Confucius also faced this problem. Someone asked Confucius, "If your father stole a sheep, would you report him?" In Confucius' time, stealing a sheep was probably similar to stealing a BMW now. If your father stole a BMW, would you report him? If you report him, you are upholding the principle of the law. If you don't report him, you are upholding the principle of family. Both are right, both are principles, and both may be important to you. Which self should you be? Let me give you an example from a company. Suppose you are the CEO of a company, and the company's performance is poor. Shareholders demand that you lay off employees. If you lay off employees, you are upholding the principle of being responsible to shareholders. If you don't lay off employees, you are upholding the principle of being responsible to employees. Both principles are right, and both are principles you want to uphold. But in this situation, which principle should you uphold? If you ask me what you should do in this situation, I have two suggestions. The first suggestion is that you can think about which principle is more important to you and then uphold that principle. However, I have a second suggestion, which may be more difficult to implement but has a better effect. This suggestion is the integrated thinking I mentioned earlier. Since both principles are important to you, why not achieve both at the same time? You should consider how to achieve both instead of choosing one over the other as the final choice. 5. Leadership Formula: Who should I be? As I just mentioned, the three dilemmas of being oneself can be addressed with a leadership motto: who should I be? The first dilemma is about whether to be the self that you want to be or the self that others want you to be. The second dilemma is about whether to be the self that pursues results or the self that upholds principles. The third dilemma is about whether to be the self that upholds one principle or the self that upholds another principle. Your answer and choice to each of these dilemmas is a process of shaping yourself and becoming who you are.